Texas man dumps his ill pooch at the animal shelter to die, but what followed changed the dog's life forever.
But before we start, please take a moment to give this video a like, subscribe to Happy World, and hit the bell so you'll never miss these great stories.
A lot of people bring pet animals into their families, hoping these pets would make their lives more joyful, but there are times when the owner fails to take proper care of them. The worst consequence to which is that these animals are often abandoned by their owners and are left to live on their own. Situations like these can heavily affect these pets, both physically as well as psychologically. The same thing happened with a pooch named Radar, who was dumped by his very owner at a shelter when the dog needed him the most. But the worst part was that the man lied about Radar's situation so he could easily leave the dog behind and run for the hills. What did the man say, and why did he abandon his dog? Many people may find the story of this pooch extremely heartbreaking, and it indeed is. Unfortunately, Radar had to experience an event in his life that no pet should ever go through. Any pet animal is usually close to their respective owners and looks up to them as someone who'll adore them and take care of them when tough times come. I know a lot of people who take pride in owning a pet and treat these creatures as their family, but not everyone has the same heart. However, even an abandoned dog's fate can be averted and change his life. It all began when an anonymous man stopped by a shelter to leave behind a miserable puppy. As it transpired, the puppy's name was Radar. When the man was asked about his actions and why he would pet a dog in the first place if he ultimately wanted to abandon the poor creature, he came up with the silliest explanation, an excuse that got on everyone's nerves. Radar's owner told the volunteers present at the shelter that his pooch was almost 20 years old, and he was too old, so it was better to put him away as the dog had been sick for long. The staff was stunned to hear this, and there was not a single sign of stress on the owner's face while he talked about putting his dog to death. Everyone tends to have a different psychological reaction to a situation, but the tone in this man's voice was as if he didn't care at all, and what happened next made this assumption more certain. The staff at the shelter were still contemplating what to do next, but they were baffled by what happened in the next moment. Just when they were thinking about offering free treatment to the pooch, the staff at the shelter didn't even get a chance to commence a full-body checkup, as the man did something that stunned every individual present there. Only a minute later, when the staff at the shelter was busy making an effort to somehow contact a vet to get the dog checkup, the man absconded without anyone knowing. He simply left his pet behind because he had turned sick and old, no matter what his reasons were, as there was no justification for his actions. How could he leave this pet alone to suffer when he needed him the most? But the volunteers couldn't simply sit back and watch, and they did what was best suited for the situation. The staff at the shelter wanted to help the little pooch, but given the medical condition Radar was in, and also the fact how little they knew about him, made things a bit difficult for them. They could just do anything they wanted and later regret the consequences of it. It was when they decided to seek experts' help, who would know better about what to do in such a situation, and that was when they got in touch with the Animal Justice League. Radar was lucky to have ended up in the right hands. When his own owner ditched him at a shelter house, he was going to be rescued by a group of people who had met him for the first time. The volunteers at the Animal Justice League were well aware of the pooch's story, and they were all in to help the abandoned dog. The first thing they had to do was to get him checked by a vet to know more about his underlying medical condition. The fellas who were appointed at the Animal Justice League realized the need of the moment, and they immediately headed to the vet. They decided to get the pooch a full-body checkup to determine his exact age and figure out the exact medical condition he was apparently suffering from. They were skeptical about the details the former owner of Radar had given them, but the vet's revelation blew their mind. What could the vet have possibly said? The dog was in pretty bad condition when he was first brought to the vet for the examination. The volunteers who rescued the dog were worried sick as Radar kept on puking the whole time. Seeing him in such a state had already alleviated their worries, and their worried minds had now started to assume the worst while they anxiously waited for the examination to be over. But when they heard it from the vet, they finally took a long breath of relief as the vet had a piece of shocking yet good news to break. The vet also pointed out the super long and unclean nails that Radar had for long. That shows how reckless his former owner was and how little he cared about Radar. But what was the good news? The good thing was that Radar was not 20 years old. The vet drew the conclusion that the dog was about half the mentioned age, and he had still plenty of years left to live. The volunteers present at the clinic were relieved to know that Radar's days were not limited, but there was still a major concern that needed to be addressed. Radar wasn't that old, but he was still sick. He would throw up too often and was unable to digest the simplest of food. Due to malabsorption, the dog had become too weak. But what was the reason behind the constant struggle the little pooch had with his stomach? The vet came up with the test reports that would give a better explanation. The dog was diagnosed with a severe stomach virus and he needed immediate medical attention. Radar needed proper care and handling if he were to make it back to his best version. The doctor had prescribed a couple of antibiotics to take care of the stomach virus. While that was not it, Radar's bone had shrunk and he had been constantly losing muscle mass from his back legs, which the vet stated to be the aftermath of the trauma. While the vet wasn't certain about the reason for the dog's physical trauma, he mentioned other factors such as age could also be held accountable. We really don't know his story, which always makes these cases so hard and sad, Graves said. After spending a couple of days at the medical center, Radar had finally started to show signs of improvement. He was now feeling a lot better, and he was no longer scared. The medicine had done wonders against the stomach virus and aided much relief to the dog. Things were about to get better for this pooch, but it appeared as if he had been missing someone. Who was this person? While Radar had made an incredible recovery and bounced back against all odds, it still seemed as if he was lost or missing someone. He would roam around all over the place, absolutely sniffing everything and anything he got his nose on. Perhaps Radar was still looking for his previous owner, and he didn't even realize that he had been abandoned. He was also looking for a more familiar smell. When he didn't find someone whose smell he recognized, he would just pick a person and cuddle up next to them as close as possible, Graves said. Radar was a lot better than he was when the volunteers at the Animal Justice League first saw him, although he still wasn't completely over his past. If Radar was to get over his past, he had to find himself a new and different place that could give him better care and attention. But the poor dog couldn't do it all on his own, however. There was someone who could help him out. The workers at the shelter had helped Radar when his own owner abandoned him, and now they were going to do something that would change his life and make it even better. The Animal Justice League was like an angel in disguise to the little pooch. They were willing to do whatever it took to bring a change in Radar's life. They knew that Radar wouldn't thrive in the noisy ambiance of the shelter house. They all loved him and were happy to have him there with them, but they knew it wasn't good for the little dog in the long run. They took to their official Facebook account and posted a plea. Radar needed a new home where he could live with a loving and caring family. The Animal Justice League posted a picture of Radar online, along with a brief description of his story. This little Ewok-looking teddy bear is Radar. It's pretty easy to see that Radar is terrified, confused, and wondering where anything familiar went. Radar's story was touching hearts everywhere it went. Surprisingly, though, there were many people who expressed their wish of adopting Radar. People fell in love with Radar the moment they saw him, and it seemed like everyone wanted a piece of this little pooch. But Radar has had a dark past, and he just couldn't be handed to anyone. We actually were in the middle of our monthly board meeting, and a volunteer tagged us on Facebook, Jennifer Graves, Rescue Board President, stated. A woman named Brandy Hendricks was the chosen one to foster Radar. There was no other candidate who could beat her in the contest, as she had previously adopted a cat and a dog who she still owns. She had the perfect resume to adopt Radar, and so it happened. Radar's life was about to change. Radar hasn't felt so great, but he definitely wants to be around people, said Brandy Hendricks, Radar's foster mom. Brandy is also a foster owner to a cat and another dog, and Radar is having the time of his life with his new family members. He's getting all the love and affection that he deserves, which he was deprived of in the past. He is more alert and started to follow me around and will sit next to me with his head in my lap, Brandy says. Radar was being showered with love and care that made him realize that he was not to live a fearful life anymore. It was obvious by the look on his face. He had smiled for the very first time ever since he had been brought to the Animal Justice League Center, and the smile on his face became the reason for everyone's happiness. Anyone who met Radar would tell you that he was a cute little dog overflowing with joy. He didn't look like the same dog who was once abandoned to live a miserable life with a stomach illness. He was a new dog all over who was now willing to make new friends. Radar's story is a fairy tale bliss where things were rough initially, but he eventually got his happy ending. The shelter staff is hopeful that Radar will eventually forget his dreadful past. What matters the most now is that he is in the best shape and, fortunately for him, in safer hands. No one would ever hurt him again. Brandy is a proud foster mom to this little pooch, and he doesn't shy off from expressing his love to her. He's a cute small fur ball who fits in Brandy's lap like he was meant to be her pet, and his new friends are always around to keep him busy. Another overwhelming trait of Radar is that he is good at making friends. Who says a cat and a dog can't get along? Radar even managed to befriend the cat, who also lived at the shelter, irrespective of the fact that they are meant to be enemies by nature. It's also because of the fact that they were all once abandoned and they are happy to be accepted and adored. These cute creatures are simply happy by the attention and love they now get, and they couldn't care less about where it comes from. The pooch, who was once abandoned by his own owner, has now found a best friend embodied in a cat. They are both mischievous and are often found running and playing around all over the place. They literally pick each other's legs, and luckily for Radar, the life he's living now is much better than ever. He doesn't miss his previous owner anymore, nor does he roam around all over the place, sniffing for a familiar smell. Brandy's love has done wonders to this little pooch. Home is where the heart is, and Radar's heart belongs here at the shelter. He's found a new home, and he's way happier and better now. He's in the pink of his health as he has gotten rid of his stomach ailment, and there were people at the shelter to take care of his nails. And for now, we all know Brandy is always by his side. Things are ultimately at their best and couldn't have been any better for the little pooch. No matter how worse things were initially, the ending Radar got made up for all the ordeal he had to face. There are many people out there who are similar to Radar's previous owner in the way that they treat their pets, and unfortunately there are many pets who are victims of such inhuman behavior. But there's a lot more than pointing fingers that can be done. There's a way to make things better, and we are going to discuss how. Not every abandoned dog is as lucky as Radar, as life doesn't always give one happily ever after. Not only dogs, but there are also many other pets who had been abandoned by their former owners and are now living a dreadful life. They are in desperate need for help, but unfortunately there aren't enough helping hands to reach out to them. Therefore, we would request and advise people who plan to add a pet to their family to opt for adoption rather than buying one from a pet store. Not only will you heal a broken soul, but you'll also experience the bliss that one gets by bringing a smile on a sad face. Opting for adoption instead of buying a pet from a store is much better in many ways. How come, you ask? Not all of us are the same in the way that we treat others, and these pets out there deserve to see the bright side of life as well. Kindness can do wonders, and there's no better medicine that heals better than love. These pets will eventually end up in a loving home with a family to look after them, and they might never be able to express to you in words, but the look on their face will tell you how grateful they are to foster pet owner. There are a lot of other things to learn from this story, but the most important lesson is that we should never lose hope or simply give up on the ones we love, even if they are cats or dogs for that matter. You never know what the future holds, and one needs more than just medical attention to turn their health around. Love, care, and attention might not go hand in hand with logic, but when one is on the receiving end, they can bring a change in anyone's mood. As it transpired, what Radar was missing the most in life was love. Everything took a 180 once love made its way into his life. He was a lot better after feeling what it's like to be loved. We all know how heavily a dog can feel. They can sense what others feel for them, and eventually Radar had to make peace with the fact that his previous owner was not as good as the dog had thought. This is certainly not an everyday story, and we are glad that things ended up on a happy note. Radar ended up in the hands of a more responsible and loving owner, something he desperately needed to change his life. Serendipitous, isn't it? We knew that if it was in fact his time to cross the Rainbow Bridge, we wanted it to be in a home with dignity and not in the shelter where he was alone and scared, Graves added. Do you know that abandoning an animal can get you punished under the charge of a misdemeanor? Many laws have been enforced against such acts in many states, but it becomes nearly impossible to identify such people, as they certainly don't leave their pet license behind. Even if one is traced, the fines imposed are as mere as a sum of $50, which can reach up to $500 in some cases, and failing to meet it can result in a 30-day imprisonment. Do you think there's a need for more strict measures? We understand that all the owners aren't that bad, and tough times can force people to let go of their pets when they are not able to meet their expenses. But one doesn't need to abandon them, as there are better things to be considered. You can list your dog for adoption or hand them to an acquaintance or a friend if they're willing to adopt them. Leaving them out on their own should never be an option. Every cloud has a silver lining. It will be right to say that Radar's story perfectly fits this saying. However, we would like to thank every individual who made it possible for Radar to turn his life around. The volunteers at the animal shelter and the Animal Justice League, Radar's foster mother Brandy Hendricks, who made sure that the future is bright for the little pooch.